Alright guys, so this week we're going to study the scientific method. So I will highlight what you need to write down. So what you're going to do for the first thing I need you to write down is the steps of the scientific method. So you're going to write steps in the scientific method and you're going to number these. Starting here and ending with here. Okay, so your steps in the scientific method is observation, hypothesis, experiment, data collection, conclusion, and retest. And we're going to break down each step in the scientific method. So observation. So observation, you're going to gather through your senses. So you're observing, okay? That is what observation is. So a scientist noticed that something in their natural world. So it's your observation. You make the observation. So an example is noticing many salamanders near a pond have curved tails instead of straight tails. So our second step is going to be our hypothesis. Okay, so it is a suggested solution to the problem. You're going to predict the outcome, okay? You're going to predict the outcome and it must be testable. So sometimes you'll write it as if or then. That's how you'll start your hypothesis. Just depends. So an example of a hypothesis might be that the salamanders have curved tails due to the pollutant in the moist soil where they live. Okay, a hypothesis is an educated guess. Okay, it's your assumption, it's your guess. The experiment is a procedure to test the hypothesis. Okay, so you've made your educated guess. So now you're going to test it through the experiment. So a variable is the factor in the experiment that is being tested. So whatever you're testing is considered your variable. So a good experiment is only going to have one variable, one thing that you're testing. When you try to test multiple things, something always goes wrong or it makes your experiment not correct. So we're going to have controls and variables and we'll talk about those. But an experimenter changes one factor and observes or measures what happens. So that's why you're only picking one factor. You're going to pick one factor and you're going to observe and measure that factor. So a controlled variable. So a controlled variable is the constant. Okay, it's the constant. You're going to make a special effort to keep other factors constant. Okay, so that it won't affect the outcome. So when you're making these factors constant, okay, that's called a controlled variable. You're controlling that only one factor is being changed. So what is the purpose of a control? Controls are not being tested. They're used in comparison. So you're going to have a controlled variable because you need the one that you're changing to have something to compare it to. So other variables, so the factor that is being changed is known as the independent variable. So whatever you're changing, okay, so the factor that I'm changing is known as my independent variable. It's independent. There's only one, okay? The factor that is being measured, okay, or observed, which is not being changed. So the dependent variable is not changed. I'm dependent on what it looks like to make my comparisons. So some examples, okay, so for example, suppose you're trying to figure out what is the fastest route to walk home from school. You try several different routes and time how long it takes you to get home by each one. Since you're the only one interested in finding out the fastest route for you, you will do the walking by yourself. Okay, so what were my variables? Verifying the route is the independent variable. Okay, it's what I'm changing. I'm changing what route I take every day. The time it takes me is my dependent variable. Okay, I'm trying to see which time is the fastest. Keeping the same walker, which would be you, through the time is the control variable. So I'm not changing who is doing the walking. It's going to be me. Okay. So one more thing, it's best to make several trials with each independent variable. So sometimes maybe you'll get stuck in traffic or maybe you'll have to wait longer to leave. Okay, so or maybe you don't get released from school at the same time. So it's better to do it several times. So remember, to have a valid experiment, 2 groups are required: the controlled and the experimental groups. Okay, so the control and the experimental group. And there should always only be one variable. So data. So data is the results of the experiment. It may be quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative is numbers. Okay, so it must be organized. Okay, you must organize your data. It can be organized into charts, tables, or graphs. It doesn't really matter as long as it's organized. All right, and then you have the conclusion. That is the answer to the hypothesis based on the data obtained from the experiment. Your conclusion is basically stating whether or not your hypothesis was correct or not. Was your hypothesis right? Was it wrong? Okay, so that's what your conclusion is. Your retest is, you always should retest to verify the results in the experiment. Okay, so to make sure that you didn't make a mistake, or maybe you need to retest and see if that's still the fastest route for you to take to go hunt. Okay, so that is your retest. That's why you need to retest. Okay, so you guys are at the end of the lecture. So if you have any questions, send Ms. Wallace an email. Make sure you upload your notes to the Canvas page, or you can bring them to school and show them to me, but you have to do either or. You can either bring them to school or post them online. Okay, if you have any questions, send Ms. Wallace an email.